Stories about ghosts, ghouls, and goblins make up the bulk of horror tales. But there's another type of horror story that strikes deep within our bones. The kind that makes you feel dread and despair without any jump scares or creepy crawlies. And it's in this vein that we're going to explore some terrifying paranormal tales that will leave you questioning the nature of reality itself. These are our silent screams, stories so horrifying they don't even need sound to terrify you. Our next story is going to take us over to Scotland, where we meet our narrator, who is camping with her friends. She says she and her 3 friends had driven from their home in Edinburgh to the Scottish borders to camp for the weekend. On the first night, however, the group was awoken by what sounded like screams in the forest. Naturally, the friends were a bit freaked out, but they put it down to an animal and went back to sleep. That was until 3 a.m. when the screaming started again. This time it was closer and more intense. The narrator got out of her tent to investigate, and her friends watched in suspense as she shone her torch into the darkness. When nothing was found, they decided to pack up and go home. As dawn broke, the group began to search for their car, which they remembered parking near an old stone circle. As they walked, the hair on the back of their necks stood up, and the feeling of dread filled their bodies. Then they saw it. There in the middle of the circle was a pentagram drawn in stones. They ran to their car and got out of there. But later that day, they checked their photos and noticed something disturbing. In one picture taken the previous evening, a strange dark figure could be seen standing behind them in the forest. It was humanoid in shape, but unnaturally thin and tall. They never went back to that campsite, but still wonder if they accidentally stumbled into a satanic ritual. Our next story comes from a Reddit user who says he was an electrical apprentice working on a new housing development. He and his team were tasked with installing conduit in one of the empty houses. It was an old building with very little lighting, so they brought in floodlights to work under. They got to work laying the conduit, but every time one of them would enter a room, lights would flicker and dim before returning to full brightness. Thinking it was just an old building settling, they continued their work. But then things took a turn. As they moved from room to room, objects began moving around. At first, it was small things like pens rolling across tables. But soon, it escalated to heavier items, such as lamps being knocked off tables and entire drawers being pulled out from under desks. The workers were so frightened that they dropped everything and ran outside. Once they were safely away from the house, they watched in disbelief as the lights inside flickered wildly before going out completely. When they reported it to their boss, he just laughed and said it was a haunted house. Apparently, many of the houses on the development were experiencing similar phenomena, moving objects, flickering lights, and shaking beds, but no one seemed to care. After finishing up for the day, the men decided not to return to that house, and instead head straight for the pub. Over a few pints of beer, they compared ghost stories, and one of the workers mentioned that he knew a ghost hunter who lived nearby. They decided to call him to see if he could help. The ghost hunter arrived and after inspecting the house told them that it was indeed haunted. He invited them all back the next day to conduct a proper investigation. Accepted. But in the meantime, none of the workers wanted to return to the house. The ghost hunter set up cameras and other equipment to monitor the house overnight. He returned the following morning to find that most of his equipment had been destroyed, and the film and batteries were missing from his cameras. All that was left was one photograph, which showed a transparent figure standing in front of the fireplace in one of the rooms. None of the workers ever asked to be assigned to that house again, and the ghost hunter never returned. Our next story is from a Reddit user who says that when she was in college, she and her boyfriend decided to spend Halloween at an amusement park called Canopolis. The park was eerily silent with only a handful of visitors. The couple decided to stay overnight in the park's abandoned hotel. As they walked through the empty corridors, they could hear the distant sounds of carnival music and laughter. Feeling creeped out, they decided to return to the lobby where they waited for morning. But just before sunrise, they heard footsteps in the corridor outside their room. Thinking it was just some teenagers playing a prank, they ignored it. But then the footsteps stopped right outside their door. The couple cautiously approached the door and listened intently. Then they heard a knock. Thinking it was just the wind, they went back to bed. But moments later, they heard the knocking again. My boyfriend and I screamed at the top of our lungs and held each other tight, she says. We didn't move or breathe until the sun came up, and we were able to check out. The couple never stayed in a haunted place again. For our next story, we can travel to a Reddit thread where the question, "Is there such a thing as a ghost?" was posed, and one user shared the following tale. I was in a large, old Victorian house with a friend. It was a beautiful home with high ceilings and large rooms. We were walking through the house, discussing how beautiful it was. As we walked down a long hallway, my friend suddenly stopped in her tracks. Her eyes were wide with terror. She began to hyperventilate, and I asked her what was wrong. She pointed to a spot on the floor, where she said she could see the ghost of a young girl sitting. I, of course, couldn't see anything, but for the first time I noticed the faint outline of a rocking horse on the wall nearby. We walked into the adjoining room and saw a rocking horse in the corner covered in dust. I'm a huge skeptic when it comes to things like this, but this experience left me questioning what I don't know. Our next story is from a Reddit user, who says she was an emergency medical technician for nearly 20 years. She and her partner were dispatched to an apartment complex for a call of an elderly woman who had fallen. They found the woman lying on the floor in her living room, and she was visibly agitated and crying. The EMT stayed with the patient while her partner went to get the stretcher. When the partner returned, they helped the woman onto the stretcher and wheeled her to the ambulance. As they did, the woman kept repeating, "Please hurry, we're gonna miss her." Confused, the EMT asked the woman what she meant, but she just kept crying and mumbling to herself. As they drove to the hospital, the EMT tried to calm the woman down, but she became increasingly agitated and began screaming at the top of her lungs. EMT had no choice but to pull over and call the police to help restrain the woman. When the cops arrived, they asked the EMT to continue on to the hospital without her. The EMT refused, saying that she needed medical attention. The police agreed, and they all headed to the hospital together. At the emergency room, the doctor sedated the woman and admitted her. The EMT never saw the woman again, but she often thinks about the incident and wonders what could have caused it. Was it a simple case of dementia, or was there something more sinister at play? For our final story, we can head over to a Reddit thread where one user shared the following tale. I used to work at a gas station, and one night a man came running into the store in nothing but his underwear. He was soaked in blood and babbling incoherently. He looked at me and asked for a cigarette. I said, "Sorry, you'll have to leave the store for that." And he replied, "No, I'll smoke it right here." And he proceeded to take a lighter out of his pocket and light a cigarette. While he was smoking it, I asked him if he was sure he was okay and if he needed me to call an ambulance. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You can call an ambulance, but they won't come. They never do." And as he said that, his face turned to ash and he fell to the ground. I called the police and paramedics and they came quickly. The man was taken to the hospital where he died. I hope he found peace. That concludes our collection of scary stories that don't need sound to be terrifying. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe for more paranormal content. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.